Carol, what I have to do for my project is I have to interview an older woman about what was it like growing up in the 20th century, 50s, 60s, 70s, and so on.
An older woman. Okay. Okay. And whoops, hold on a minute. Let me get this bike, get it lower. I think that's the lowest it goes. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead. So you have to interview a woman. Go
Yeah,
ahead, I didn't hear you.
yeah, with the premises for the interview is just touching like the like femininity, just like the more political side of things. So I'm gonna just start off with a few, with just a basic question. So you I know from what I remember, you were born in 1950, correct?
Yes.
And what was it like growing up in the 50s?
Well, could you be a little more specific?
What what
You
what
want
was it
what do you want the focus to be?
just like growing up as as a young daughter of in 1950s America?
Okay. What do you want me to focus on? Well, I mean, I don't remember too much about the early years. I remember when I started school, my my mom was very independent. She had a part-time job when my brother and I went to school, and she always made sure she was home by the time we returned from school.
And
And a lot of times I had to, my brother and I, because she worked, and most of the kids that went to school during those times would walk to school. We didn't have any school buses back then. We walked to school, but because my mom and dad were not home, so my brother and I would eat lunch in the school auditorium. There were just a few students who did that, and my mom would pack us a paper bag lunch and we would eat in the auditorium, but she was always home when we got home from school. When I got a little bit older, I was in charge of starting dinner, maybe putting something in the oven or something like that, or making the salad. But my mom and dad both worked, when I was growing up.
okay, and Carol, yeah, as a young girl in the 1950s and 60s, did you notice anything different by how women and girls were treated back then?
Um, I would say, um, not in my particular situation, although I mean, most of the women, like I said, were um, homemakers and stayed home. My mom did work. Um, that was, probably the biggest difference. The father was the breadwinner, and the mom was home and took care of the children and took care of everything around the house.
Yeah, another question I have for you is, what, 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 what were your preteen and your middle school and high school years like for you being a teenage girl?
Okay, what did you want to know about it? Say the last.
Um,
What
uh,
did you want to know about my teenage years, middle school and
what,
high school?
what was it like being a teenage girl in the 50s and 60s? Or in the 60s, I should say. Did,
Um, it was just very, typical teenage years growing up. To hang out with my friends. I mean, we didn't have any cell phones, of course, and no internet. So, mainly we just got together with our girlfriends at each other's houses or played outdoors. as a teenager, we would go to the bowling alley and hang out there. Um, I was involved in a youth group, and there were activities, social activities, with a youth group that I belonged to. Um, that's pretty much it, just, hanging out. We didn't, like I said, have the conveniences that the kids have nowadays with phones and internet. So, we just hung out. We just spent time with our friends.
Yeah, and Carol, well, one thing I must ask you regarding into a very important event in American history. In Nov on November 22nd of 1963, President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Texas. Do you remember anything particular about that event, or how
Oh,
you or your
everything.
mom reacted to it?
Oh my goodness. Oh, everything. Everyone remembers exactly where they were. I was in junior high school in a science class, and an announcement came over the intercom, the school intercom, and everyone, of course, was in shock. I think we were even dismissed to go home, but everyone just gathered around, their television set and just, watched the horror, and all of the events that transpired around that event. And, the shooting, of course, of John F. Kennedy, and then the Lee Harvey Oswald, the assassin, was killed. And it was, we just sat around the television set, and I believe we didn't have school for several days just to witness this on television and to watch. It was just horrible. People were just, in shock and crying, and it was just something that you don't ever forget.
And Carol, may I ask you if you remember what was your mom's reaction to that event?
Oh, well, the
Uh,
same thing. I think everyone had the same reaction.
yeah, I got, yeah,
I don't think it discriminated on gender or age. I think just the whole country um, reacted the same way. It was just a horrible, horrible event. He was just such a beloved president, and a young family, and his beautiful wife and two young children. It was just tragic for the whole country.
and Carol, now moving on. So in the '60s, during your teenage and you, so in about 1968, I imagine you graduated high school around that time, correct?
Yes, I did. 1968.
So when you started college, well, what was it? What was it like being a female college student in say the early '60s, early '70s?
Well, I graduated, and I was very, very shy. I was a very quiet young lady and kind of insecure. But I did the best that I could. In those days, there were girl dorms, or if there were co-ed dorms, the boys and the girls were separated um, in different buildings. Um, and you tried to, adjust the best way you could. I personally had a very hard time because I was so quiet and shy. But you just went to class, and later on, I think my freshman year decided to join a sorority, and then I became a little bit more social with the girls in the sorority. But it was, pretty much, you know, studies and a little social life, and, um, you know, parties, that kind of thing.
Okay, and just and just for the important part of my interview. Did you notice any controversial controversies on what was your thoughts on the controversies of feminism, with women's sexuality, and the basis of women in general? Did you have any particular thoughts or ideas about that?
Well, that was the beginning of the feminist movement. I remember Gloria Steinem, was a big feminist advocate for women's rights, and so that movement began in the 60s during my years at school. So I do remember that. I was, in college during those days, and there wasn't so much happening on my particular college campus with the feminist movement, but we were all very much aware of, what was happening, that women were fighting for equal rights, and equal pay and that kind of thing, equal job opportunities.
Yeah. So Carol, I'm now gonna ask ask you during the years of college and shortly after, like say the 70s and early 80s, what would you say you had any ideas or have you seen any ideas or expectations during women during that time?
Okay, can you repeat the last part again?
Ha- ha-
About what?
Have you seen have you seen any ideas or expectations about women change women over your lifetime at that point?
You mean in the 70s?
Yes,
Um, in the
have
early
you,
70s?
yes.
Um, well, I graduated from college and I was married um, pretty young, right after I graduated college. And I moved to a city that my husband grew up at in Rockford, Illinois. And I graduated with a teaching degree. I um, got a teaching job right away. And in those days, the teaching profession was very much female dominated. Um, there were just a few men teachers, like, teaching PE and that kind of thing. But generally speaking, I think the education and the teaching profession was very much dominated by women at that time.
And Carol, as a women's special ed teacher, do you think the female teachers were treated any differently than the few men that were at your school?
Um, no, I don't think so. Not in the teaching profession. I can't. I don't really recall feeling that way. Um, maybe I was too young to know, but I really didn't. I was a young married person and starting out in a career. I didn't really experience any discrimination at that time, personally. I'm sure that there must have been, but in my particular situation, I did not.
Now, now, Carol, as I move on, I'm gonna start off in the 80s now. As you might recall, in March of 1981, shortly after the election, President Ronald Reagan was almost assassinated by John Hinckley Jr. So, what was your what was your reaction as a young, young special ed teacher at that time to the assassination attempt of President Reagan?
Yeah, well, the same thing as, what I experienced um, as a young girl with John F. Kennedy. It was devastating to witness. I don't know if there was a difference between being a female or a male, but certainly it was a shock to see um, that happen again in the United States. Of course, there was the incident of Martin Luther King Jr., who was assassinated, as well as Robert F. Kennedy, that was assassinated during the 60s. So it I don't think there was any difference. It was just as an American, it was male or female was a terrible thing to see again.
And Carol, now I would like to get a little more personal. So, a- as a as a young 23-year-old woman in the
60s and 70s.
70s and 80s, so would you
Okay.
say you had any difficulties regarding your race, ethnicity, or sexual orientation towards your daily life? What was any of that affected by your gender in any way?
Oh, I personally cannot pinpoint anything. Um, I do you mean maybe just about gender?
Yeah.
Maybe as I grew up in a very predominantly Jewish area in Skokie, and moving to Rockford, it was kind of a cultural difference. Moving into a city that had very few Jewish people, so that was quite a difference. And I there might have been some anti-Semitism that I had never experienced before.
Yeah, so do you think being Jewish has affected your life as a woman at any point?
I do not believe that personally that had an effect on me as far as my occupation or um, anything of that nature. Just it was different. It was different growing up, being around so many Jewish people, and then seeing that you were in a minority was very different.
Okay, okay, thank you, Carol. And as we go towards the the the, the middle towards the middle of your life, say the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, do, do you think did, did you see any changes in feminism or female sexuality in let's say politics or socially? Do you think when do you think women had a do you think women were getting treated better or worse as the decades progressed into the 90s or 2000s?
Well, certainly, women have made a lot of advances, in equal pay and equal opportunities, um, making their views known. So I think, women have, in my lifetime, have really come a long way,
Okay.
especially speaking out and, against unfairness.
And has that was that unfair did that unfairness ever impact you in any way?
About being a woman.
Yes.
Um, I'm just trying to think. Um, I don't think in my personal life anything has um, been in just because I was a woman. I don't think anything made any event changed or impacted my occupation or um, any other of my rights. Not in my situation, but certainly in society. Maybe it had to do with the profession I was in. I'm not quite sure. That could be it, because I was in a female-dominated occupation. Perhaps that made a difference. I don't know.
Now, now, Carol, since you, may I ask you, what are your womanly views on marriage and motherhood? What was what was it like raising your two children along with your husband?
Well, I taught before I had children, and then when I did have children, they were very close in age, and so I did take some time off from teaching. I did resign and did other things, volunteer work, and I had like a little part-time job at the YMCA. Got pretty involved in the children's school. When they were both full-time in elementary school, I decided to go back to teaching, and I was subbing for a little while doing substitute teaching, and then I decided to go back and get my master's degree, and that helped a great deal in pay increase in teaching, as well as gave me more job opportunities to get back into the teaching field. So I managed to get 30 years of teaching experience in before I retired.
And
But I enjoyed being a full-time mom. I can say that, rather than trying to work full-time and to raise the kids. For my situation, I was fortunate in that I was able to take some time off and be with the kids when they were young.
Carol, uh, our time is kind of running out here, so I'm gonna just ask you a couple more questions before we before we go. So during your retirement, have you seen any changes towards women and feminine sexuality, feminism, personally or politically or publicly in general, so to speak?
Well, certainly in sexuality, um, I think society has come a long way in accepting women and men in whatever sexual orientation they are. So that's a lot of progress in my lifetime.
Okay, Carol. I'm going to end this interview here for today. But I just wanted to thank you for taking your time to participate and give us your experiences. So uh, uh, I'm gonna